One of the things that I really dislike is conflict, okay? Not necessarily violent conflict, although I dislike that as well. I mean verbal conflict, verbal confrontation, when instead what could have happened was a productive civil dialogue, okay? So those are the cases that I'm talking about here. I always see missed opportunities to have productive discourse, okay? And it bothers me. I think it's unfortunate. So today I want to spend some time to discuss how I think we can have better discussions with each other and how we can disagree respectfully. So the first thing that I want to point out is that knowledge is difficult to attain. So oftentimes it's very difficult to attain, okay? And I think it's important for us to keep this in mind when we engage in dialogue with others, okay, about controversial issues, whether it be cultural, religious, political, whatever. Now, keeping that in mind, I think the second thing to remember is that the goal is to attain the truth. The goal is to attain this knowledge, right? Knowledge is difficult to attain, and we want to attain it. The appropriate intellectual disposition to have is to assume that you do not have the entire truth, okay, given what we've said prior. Now, this means that we should assume that other people have a portion of the truth, right? Just assume going into this dialogue that this other person has some perspective and insights that you don't have, all right? And once you enter a discussion with that perspective and with that attitude, it can drastically change the trajectory of this dialogue in a positive way. All right, so once you have this correct approach, the next thing that you should remember is that you shouldn't attack the person, okay? Don't attack the person. Rather, discuss the arguments, discuss the issues, discuss your positions, okay? Because when you start attacking a person by maybe like calling them names, right? The other person is going to become defensive, okay? And then you're not going to get anywhere. And then you're just going to end up in this verbal fight, right? And that's not productive, especially if the goal is to attain truth. What does this look like, right? When you don't attack the person? Well, the first thing is that you don't call them names, okay? Don't call them ignorant. Don't call them stupid. Don't say that they're biased, okay? None of that stuff, right? Just focus on their argument. They are saying this, right? And you are saying that. Let's try to figure out why we think this is true or that is true. Why we think this position is more true than the other position, okay? Those are the things that we should focus on. Okay, so then when you start discussing your different arguments and positions, I think it's helpful to ask clarifying questions, okay? So if they say what their beliefs are, you can ask, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean when you say X, right? Can you clarify what that means, okay? And then that would help them better understand their position, because then they're pushed to explain it, right? And then that would help you better understand their position, okay? So I think that would be a good example. Another thing that you could ask is, I guess I'm just not understanding this part of your argument, right? You say this, but does that mean that, right? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying this, right? So that's another clarifying question. And again, that pushes them to break down the argument even further. Another example of a question that you could ask is, well, what do you think about this argument? A response. I've heard that some people think this, or this one person I read said this in response to your position. Like, what is your response to that? So the reason I think that that sort of question is helpful is because it shifts the kind of discussion that you're having, right? Like, it's not you versus them. It's not like I'm right, you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. It's, I have heard this argument. There is this argument out there. What is your response to this argument, right? So now it's less of a competition and more of this cooperative pursuit to attain the truth. Related to that, I don't think it's wise to directly contradict the other person. An example of that would be saying, you're wrong, right? Your belief is wrong, your argument is wrong because of whatever argument. When you directly contradict them, you come off as combative, okay? And people can sense when the discussion is combative, and then they become defensive. They dig in their heels, right? And then they're going to want to become combative. They're going to say, no, you're wrong because of this or that. So let's take an example. Let's say you're having a discussion with somebody about arranged marriages, okay? And you're of the position that they are wrong and the other person thinks that they are defensible, okay? So one of the things that you could ask is like, well, what do you mean by an arranged marriage, right? That's a more basic philosophical question. What does that mean, right? Does it mean that the child has no power whatsoever? Does it mean that the child has literally no choice, right? Is that what that practice looks like? Is that what we're talking about? And when you ask this question, you may come to realize that the practice might vary, right? Depending on the location, depending on the country and culture. So for instance, perhaps the child has some power, right? Has some option. Maybe the practice that they're talking about is not that, the child has to remain married to this other person forever. Maybe they just have to get married with them and, try it out for, a number of years. And then if it doesn't work out, then they can get divorced or something like that, right? Or it's an arranged marriage in the sense that the parents kind of select who the candidates are, and then the child has the ultimate choice, right? Who knows, right? The important thing is just to clarify what the actual position is, okay? And I think doing that will go a long way, right? Right, so the next thing I would ask is, well, why do you think it's good, right? Why do you think arranged marriages are good? Are we using some sort of social measure to determine the goodness of this practice, right? So for example, are we basing this off of survey results? Like was there some sort of survey that went around to ask people how happy they were with their romantic relationships, right? And then did the survey results show that people in societies and cultures where they practice arranged marriages are happier than people in the West? Like, is that what we're talking about? Is that what the evidence shows? Another thing that I would want to know is how they balance the values of freedom versus maybe like contentment, right? Or freedom versus life satisfaction, right? Because even if there were evidence to suggest that people in arranged marriages are happier than people in non-arranged marriages, you may think that just freedom itself is a value, right? That freedom itself is worth something and that it's important independently of how satisfied you are with your life, right? And then maybe that other person disagrees, right? Maybe that person only thinks that freedom is instrumentally valuable, right? That freedom is only valuable because it brings you life satisfaction or because it brings you contentment, right? But that would be another avenue to explore with that person, okay? And if that's the case, that's another opportunity to have a discussion, right? That's another opportunity to have a civil discourse with this person. And through that experience, you can gain even more insights, right? And even more perspectives from this person. So another question that I want to ask this person is, does his or her position mean that they would be in favor of, let's say, arranged careers? So for the sake of the argument, let's just grant the fact that your parents would select somebody good for you, okay? Because they care about you, they love you, right? And they want you to be happy. And your parents are probably wiser than you are because they're older and they have more life experience, right? And so they know how to judge a person's character. Well, that will give us reason to think that parents overall can make good decisions in regards to selecting a future partner or the candidates for a future partner, right? All right, so let's say hypothetically, there is a society that analyzes and assesses their citizens' skills and talents, okay? And they do this starting from childhood, right? And they devise some sort of algorithm that tells you as a citizen what you'd be good at, given your skill set, okay, and given your talents. Now, would this person say that arranged careers would therefore be a good thing? I would want to explore this hypothetical with that person, right? And the reason is because, well, maybe there's some disanalogy, right, that I'm not seeing immediately, right? Maybe there's something else underneath his position that hasn't previously been vocalized, right? That's also possible, okay? Or another possibility is that, he's not going to like this concept of arranged careers, right? And maybe that will push him to reconsider his position on arranged marriages, right? Maybe it turns out that he really does value freedom. Maybe it turns out that he thinks freedom is a separate value, that freedom is non-instrumentally valuable, right? That's possible, right? Who knows? But the idea is that this is a cooperative enterprise to attain truth. All right, I think I'm going to end it here. I hope you learned something interesting, and I'll see you all next time.